Reddit, what's the most suspicious thing you've witnessed? The security guards at work were running an inventory of televisions. They don't need to know that stuff. When confronted, they acted confused and had no real reason. Something tells me televisions at work are going to disappear. At my college, a huge number of projectors disappeared because some guys just came in and took them and no one questioned it. They got caught though because they listed all of them on a single eBay listing. This one guy I picked up from the airport once when I was a driver for a hotel looked very suspicious. He was also acting nervous and gave me a hard time because I didn't pick him up within 5 seconds of his call to the hotel. Then he apologized and continued to give me crap about it, and then apologized again. I thought he was crazy or something, so I ignored him. But later on during my shift I found out the guy killed himself by jumping from the 6th floor. I thought you were going to get into a Tom Cruise movie plot here. Then I realized at the end it was real. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere, no street lights for miles. It's like 11 PM, a car turns at the intersection near my house, then pulls into our parking lot. Folks own a restaurant that we live above. He turns off his car and lights. About a minute later, a cop comes through the intersection, lights and sirens blaring, and keeps driving down the road past the house. After about 5 minutes, car turns back on, pulls out of the driveway, and takes off in the other direction. 3 days ago, I left for work a little earlier than usual at about 5:15 AM, and as I was passing my elderly neighbor's place, a car pulled up super fast, slammed on the brakes. One guy got out of the car with the engine still running and ran about 3 steps up the driveway, threw something, saw me and ran back to the car that peeled out and took off. I took down the license plate and a description of both him and the driver and went to check out what he'd thrown. Newspaper. No one ever suspects the paper boy. My mom and I were walking to a 24-hour Dwayne Reed in Uptown NYC at about 1 in the morning because I was very sick. As we pass an alleyway, a man on a Harley Davidson blasts past, making a ton of noise. My mom says that must be illegal about the chopper, but it causes 2 guys who were doing a drug deal down said alley to run and split in opposite directions. Very entertaining. I bet the drug was speed. When I was a young man, I hated going grocery shopping with my mother. For some reason, she would still drag me along to the store, and I, refusing to go in, would wait in the car while she did the shopping. One day, she parked the car toward the back of the parking lot, out where there weren't many other cars. About half an hour into my car sitting session, I see that a few aisles away, an old beaten up hatchback has parked, and a Latino man in a nice suit is waiting next to the vehicle, and he just stands there for a few minutes. Eventually, another vehicle pulls up. This man is also dressed in a suit. The 2 men walk up to each other, shake hands, and then the man driving the hatchback pauses for a moment, looks around, opens up the back of his car to reveal a series of cages, full of chickens. Man number 1 and man number 2 exchange a few words, and man number 2 pushes man number 1 to the side, quickly grabs 3 of the chickens by the feet, and runs off back to his vehicle, and he speeds off. Man number 1, now pulling himself off the ground, jumps into his hatchback and speeds out of the parking lot after man number 2. TLDR. Saw a chicken deal go sour. Sketches frick. Los Polos Hermanos. About a year ago, I was on my friend's roof deck, which allows you to clearly see into the top floor apartments of the adjacent building. As we were hanging out, numerous drinks deep, we saw a strange event taking place in one of the apartments. A guy and a girl being super rough with each other. They were slapping, choking, biting, and the girl was even got some good punches in. My friend and I were just watching dumbfounded as to what we were witnessing because it looked like mutual domestic abuse. Is this a thing? After about a minute, the guy disappears into another room and emerges with a knife and starts chasing her all over the apartment. At this point, my friend pulls his phone out and punches his 911. With his finger hovering over the call button, the girl turns on the guy and lunges, spearing him onto the couch. They start violently making out, shred each other's clothing, and just start banging, while continuing to exchange slaps and chokeholds before he picks her up and they disappear into one of the side rooms. We assume a bedroom. My friend and I figured we witnessed some sort of ultra-dominant, violent foreplay. I was power washing my house and decided to take a break for a beer. The power washer is sitting on my front walk and I am sitting on my porch. I see a couple of guys in a pickup truck drive by and notice it, but not me. A few minutes later, they are back and this time they actually stop in front of the house. I see them looking at it and talking, and then the one on the curbside turns to open the door. That's when he finally notices me, turns back real quick, and the driver floors it out of there. I saw a Chinese restaurant that also doubled as a pizza joint. Like you can get Chinese food and pizza at the same place. That's suspicious as frick. I remember reading a user here who would put last night's Chinese on cheap pizza and make Chinese pizza. Reddit is a scary place. I was once in a taxi in NYC. When we stopped at a red light, the driver popped the trunk and a bike messenger going by put a bag in and closed it. Then we continued like it didn't even happen. Only 2 out of the 4 people in the car even noticed it happen. It was a newspaper. Well, this isn't necessarily suspicious, but it is mysterious and confusing. I was at work over the summer in a big office building. You know, the kind with multiple companies and a cafeteria for all the workers? Well, while I was in my way to get lunch, I passed 2 people I had never seen in there before, and I overheard one say to another, "So he goes to this all-Jewish skydiving school," and then they rounded the corner. It's been driving me crazy since then. Was that a joke or an actual story? When I was 10-11 years old, I needed something from stationery shop for my homework. I was alone at home, decided to walk there. At road, I noticed something. A man in a coat was behind me. I didn't suspect at first, didn't think that he was following until my phone rings. That was my father who called. We talked and I hung up. Then I noticed that he slowed down while I'm on the phone, but after the call he got faster and continued following me. After all that Hollywood action movies that I've watched, I thought that I had to lose my track. I took a quick turn between buildings and ran. Took the first bus that passes on the street. He couldn't see me. I was faster than him. I saw him from the bus as I go. He was looking around, searching for something. Maybe me. I don't know his intention that day, if he was planning to kidnap me or took my money, cell phone, etc. I'll never learn, thank God. That was the most suspicious thing that happened to me. Dang, that's a pretty badass way to lose him for 10-11-year-old. Not me, but a girl I used to work with. She lives in an apartment, and one day she sees 2 guys carrying what she was confident to be body parts in bags out to the parking lot. She reported it to police, but they thought she was crazy, and since she didn't actually see body parts, just what she thought were body parts in the bags, there was really nothing to look into. Turned out a few months later the people from the apartment were arrested for murder, killed someone in the apartment and chopped them up to discard the remains. Wow, so she really saw a dismembered body being carried away. That's fricked up. A couple years ago I was sitting in my bedroom playing some game with the sound off. It was late spring. This is important because I had my windows open but it wasn't warm enough to have a fan on. It was just about fully dark. All of a sudden I hear what sounds like a woman some distance away scream, "Help me. Please help me. Help," and then nothing. Now I'm not usually one for involving the cops, but that freaked me out, so I called them. Trooper came around, asked questions and patrolled up and down the road for half an hour or so. This was shortly after those 3 women were rescued in Ohio. I have to wonder if someday I will hear that somebody died in a house on my road and they found a dungeon in that person's basement. I have my suspicions, like the family across the street, that I'm nearly 100% sure the grandfather is the granddaughter's father, but nothing concrete. Not me, but back in the late 70s a friend's mum once had a strange man knock on her front door asking if he could come in, apparently needing somewhere to stay. Obviously she said no, closed the door and locked it. Not long after that, she saw him again on the news because it turned out he was Peter Sutcliffe. Halloween night, a friend and I were in a rough part of town. We saw a large dude in a gorilla suit handing a bag of something to a guy who looked like a gangster in an empty and dark parking lot. It was probably candy because Halloween, but the area is known for drug issues, so who knows. Knows candy. OHHEA, I can contribute. This literally just happened. It is really not all that exciting, but I felt bad. So, I work graveyard at a detox center, so I often talk with the police. Anyways, I was taking a break at like 2 AM and going to get some food. On the way back I passed this self-car wash where this guy was walking in all black with a bucket. Weird. Maybe he was going to a well, but whatever. So, I get back to work and was reading the police report, and there has been some guy, matching that description, going around to all the self-car washes in our city stealing the quarters and breaking the machines. Well, he has yet to be caught. Later that night the police dropped off a patient and I was talking to them, and they said that same guy has now hit another one and they have to go check it out. The one I saw. So, I could have stopped a serial car washing quarter thief. Also, my BF's parents' house is by there, and when he drove by the next morning he said there were people walking around looking at the machines. I feel so horrible. Sorry, it was not very exciting. Clearly my life is very eventful. TLDR. I make a horrible demon. Don't worry about it. There's absolutely nothing to feel horrible about. If I spied a shady guy with a bucket at 2 AM I'd have left him be too. I was driving to a meeting, and the car in front of me slowed down and tossed what looked like a pill bottle into some bushes. A couple blocks later, it did it again. I don't know if it was a drug delivery or what, but it sure looked weird. You should have stopped to collect one of the pill bottles. I saw the inside of a van once when driving. In the back of the van was a girl with tape over her mouth and two guys holding her. In the front two seats both guys stared intently at me as we passed. At my job, our company rents a large amount of offices at this fairly large office building. The building owners are Arab. The person of contact I constantly deal with has a long beard, flowing robes, sandals, and headpiece. One day I need to go and speak with him about something, so I go down to his office in the basement. His office is all the way in the back of the basement. The basement is huge and composed of many unused offices. After finding his office, I walked in on him and another Arab-looking man in a similar outfit standing over a couple of folding tables with a bunch of green Saudi Arabia passports. They looked up at me like deer caught in the headlights. I thanked them for their time and 360'd out of there. I think you mean 180'd out of there, unless you did a full circle and walked backwards. Both work. Last year I went to Belize on a cruise, and we took a boat tour. Belize is not a nice place. It has a ridiculously high poverty rate and crime rate. So we are going along in our nice tourist boat when we see two guys in a rowboat with no oars. When one guy sees us, he quickly puts something he had in his hand out of sight. There were also white packages in the boat with them. As they had no oars, somebody asked if they needed help, and they just vigorously shook their heads, not saying a word. At this point the driver floors it and gets us rich white folk the heck out of there. I also had somebody grab me into an alley in Belize City, look at me, and go, "Oh, it's not him," and then let me go, and proceed to give me a flyer for his sketchy bus tour. It was a strange place. Could have had something to do with the Colombian sea submarines. Sounds a lot like some of their tactics. A buddy of mine had just got back from basic training, and him, myself, and a mutual friend of ours were hanging out. We were visiting this shopping area where the two of them used to work. It wasn't fairly late, maybe 11:30 PM, and we were heading home. We saw this little red car stuck on the curb on the side of the parking lot. We parked our cars and got out to help him as he looked stuck, and the three of us could have easily lifted the car off of it. When we approached the car, his window was rolled down, so we asked if he needed help. He replied no and told us to leave him alone. We asked if he was sure and just kept replying the same thing. Next thing you know, this black car rolls up behind us and the driver rolls down his window and tells us to leave and that this guy didn't need our help. Of course we booked the frick out of there, making sure we weren't being followed the whole time. Come to find out, a few months later I learned there was a dead body found in the area around that time. I lived in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, about a block away from where On America's 10 Most Wanted episode was taped, just south of the theater. Samuel L. Jackson apparently developed his acting chops. One day, in the dead of winter, I was walking down the street and a guy was running, looking behind him every 10 or 15 steps. He'd run, he'd look back, he'd run, he'd look back. He had the look of panic in his eyes. On the corner of the street is a Burger King. He opened up the door, took his jacket off, and threw it inside like it were an about to explode hand grenade, then proceeded to run just as he had done before removing his jacket. No idea what the heck he was running from, but whatever it was, forced him to make the decision to stash his jacket at a Burger King in broad daylight. By the way, as a completely unrelated point, a few months later, I received a counterfeit $1 bill from that Burger King, obviously printed from someone's home computer on white paper. The girl handed it to me. I looked at it weirdly. She said, "What? You don't think it's real?" I replied. "It's obviously not real," she said. "My manager said it's real. I still have that dollar bill today. I took it in exchange for the effort someone went through to counterfeit such a small denomination. Kudos, brother, kudos. Taking your money is my reward to you." The manager printed it. Every time my ex got a text message, he would walk into another room to read it. What do you think? I'm freaking stupid. Guess who the stupid one was? He forgot to close his email before he left for work. That relationship lasted about 5 more seconds. I think he was planning your wedding. Way back when the Berlin Wall was still up, I was on a quiet trip to Germany. While there walking through a city, I saw a man drop the casing of a rifle round on the ground as he was leaving a hotel. Being the young child that I was, I picked it up and pocketed it. Throughout the years, I've suspected that I have the only evidence left behind by a Russian assassin. This guy drove by me with some droids. He said they weren't the droids I was looking for, but afterwards I couldn't shake the feeling that they were the droids I was looking for. I like you. I walked out of Barnes & Noble and there was a man standing on the sidewalk. He had a ski mask pulled halfway over his face. He was smoking and looked nervous. It wasn't cold. It was early fall and around here the weather isn't even jacket worthy until at least November. I stopped and stared at him for a moment, wondering why the frick he had a ski mask on. The man put out his cigarette, pulled the mask down all the way, and walked purposefully into Barnes & Noble with his hands in his jacket pockets. I followed him out of curiosity. No one else seemed alarmed by the man in the ski mask even enough to do a double take. I watched him travel past the cash registers and all the way to the back of the store, where the Starbucks kiosk was. He went up behind the counter, put on a Starbucks apron, and that was the end of it. In one of my previous jobs, I had a guy come up to me and ask for the time. I didn't have a watch, so I went to get my phone out when I looked up and noticed he was walking away from me, looking back every few steps. I knew the guy, so it wasn't just a random stranger, but I still think about it to this day. Actually, the other night as I was leaving my apartment, a couple sorta sketchy looking dudes run over and asked me to hold open the door. I knew they didn't live there, so I just let it close. They kept asking me to open the door and I refused because I knew they didn't live there. They then said they were staying with a friend. Guess you better buzz their apartment then, cause I'm not opening the door. So one of the guys goes over to the buzzer and starts laying on one of the suite buttons. Weird he's not answering. I then caught a quick look at which suite they were ringing. It was mine. In other words, they were full of crap. The Great Melon Exchange. Last spring I was sitting on my front porch when 2 cars rolled up in front of my neighbor's house. The drivers of both cars get out, one with a honeydew and one with a watermelon. They exchanged their melons, got back in their cars, and drove off. The bush stealer. Another day it's raining, so I'm sitting on my porch enjoying the desert rain when some guy with a shovel walks up to my neighbor's bush, digs it up, and walks away with the bush. I was too confused to even comprehend it. I doubt anyone will read this, but I was staying in a hotel in Indianapolis a few years ago. It was early in the morning and I was speaking to the concierge about something, and as I was walking to the elevator a man stopped me and asked for directions. I told him I was from out of town and that he should ask the concierge. He said, "Nah, you'll know what I'm talking about. Just come outside with me to a minute and help me find it." I said, "I really don't know my way around town. You should ask the concierge for help." He kept trying to get me to go outside with him, and I kept telling him to speak with the person at the front desk. He was definitely trying to mug me, right? I doubt it was a mugger. I'd be more worried about a kidnapper, honestly. Was driving to a friend's house in the middle of nowhere about 2 hours from my house. When I say middle of nowhere, I mean I got off onto a dirt road 4 miles before I even got to her house. There was like 3 or 4 completely random weird turns on this dirt road. When I turned off the main road, another car turned off behind me, which I thought was strange. It was a very rural area. By the second turn I was convinced this person was following me. By the third turn, which they also took, I called my friend, freaking the frick out. I told her she needed to get her butt outside right now and need to be standing out there when I got there because someone was following me and I was scared. The last turn I took was onto the dirt road driveway of a little trailer. The only other house was another trailer just down from hers. The car following me was her neighbor. Nobody believes me when I tell this, but I swear it happened. It was Halloween night 2013. After handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters, it began to drizzle and then the wind picked up. You could hear it banging against the side of the house. It was making all the leaves swirl around outside and the trees bent and swayed in the blustery wet wind. It was definitely a miserable night and nobody was out venturing around. Not even many cars on the streets. Well, my bedroom window faces the street and I had my arms crossed on the sill and was watching the dark, hurricane-type weather outside. It definitely reminded me of a creepy Halloween night with the branches blowing in the wind. Then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and stared in shock as some large guy wearing a bright red sweater and, I crap you not, a huge pumpkin on his head. Not a costume pumpkin, a straight up real life pumpkin that grows from the ground. There was a jack-o'-lantern carving on the front with 2 triangular eyes, nose and a toothy smile. It wasn't lit up or anything. The guy is just sauntering down the sidewalk, swinging his arms as the wind whips around him and the leaves are blowing all over the dang place. It's around 1 AM in the morning, nobody else is around or even awake at this point. My upper middle class neighborhood is very quiet and is mostly full of freshly retired older people. This was like something out of a movie. Who the heck was this guy and why was he walking around with a huge pumpkin on his head in the middle of a windy, rainy night? Just weirdly suspicious. It creeped me the frick out. I'm gonna take a stab in the dark here and guess drugs. I was sitting in a parking lot in my car and a man approached my car, then the car next to me. The next day in the paper I saw the headline, 2 cars stolen in liquor store parking lot. Member of the Russian mob knocking on the door when I was 12 and home alone sick from school asking about my neighbor. This was in 2002. Said neighbor worked for the FBI and was transferred to counterterrorism post 9/11 but apparently was on mob and gang duty prior. He sounds like a terrible agent if a 12-year-old neighbor knew all this about him. I saw 2 young boys in an alleyway pressed up against a wall. One of them was sort of forcing the other to kiss him while he had his hand over the pants on his nether regions, and they both looked at me whilst doing this and they did it very slowly. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.